Welcome to the Value Vault. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? Right now, scattered across America in old piggy banks, forgotten jars, and dusty dresser drawers, there are coins that look completely ordinary but hold the power to transform someone's life in an instant. And today we're diving deep into one of the most astonishing examples of this phenomenon. A coin so deceptively simple that millions of people have held it without ever knowing they were touching a potential fortune worth up to a staggering $277 million. Yes, you heard that right, $277 million for a single quarter, specifically the 1995 quarter dollar, a coin that was minted in Denver and released into everyday circulation where it still hides today, waiting to make someone unimaginably wealthy. This isn't some ancient artifact locked behind museum glass or a coin made of pure gold. This is a regular Washington quarter that you could find in your change right now. But before we reveal exactly what makes this particular quarter worth more than most lottery jackpots, let me tell you that this is just the beginning, because after we explore every fascinating detail of this 1995 quarter, we have two more coins coming up that will absolutely blow your mind. Coins with values reaching even higher into the stratosphere, so stick around because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly what to look for and you might just discover that you've been sitting on a fortune this entire time. The 1995 quarter dollar represents one of the most dramatic examples of how a simple minting error can transform pocket change into life-changing wealth. And to understand why this particular coin commands such astronomical prices, we need to travel back to 1995 and step inside the Denver Mint, facility where millions upon millions of Washington quarters were being struck for everyday use across America. The Denver Mint, identifiable by the small D mint mark located just behind George Washington's ponytail on the obverse side of the quarter, was operating at full capacity that year, producing quarters by the truckload to meet the nation's insatiable demand for circulating coinage. But somewhere in that massive production run, something went terribly wrong, or depending on your perspective, spectacularly right for a handful of lucky collectors. The error that created this $277 million coin is so rare and so dramatic that when the first examples began surfacing, numismatic experts initially thought they were elaborate fakes. But after rigorous testing and authentication, the shocking truth emerged. The United States Mint had accidentally struck a small number of 1995 quarters using the wrong planchet entirely, creating what collectors now call a wrong planchet error that ranks among the most valuable mistakes in American coinage history. To appreciate the magnitude of this error, you need to understand that quarters are supposed to be struck on planchets, which are the blank metal discs that become coins, specifically designed for quarter production with precise specifications for weight, diameter, and metal composition. But the 1995 error quarters were instead struck on planchets intended for Sacagawea dollar coins, which weren't even supposed to exist yet since the Sacagawea dollar wouldn't be introduced until the year 2000. Making this error not just rare but essentially impossible according to conventional numismatic logic. Some experts theorize that experimental planchets were being tested at the Denver facility years before the official Sacagawea dollar launch, and somehow these experimental planchets got mixed into the quarter production line, while other researchers believe the error involves a different but equally valuable wrong planchet scenario. But regardless of the exact technical explanation, the result is a quarter that weighs differently, has a different metal composition, and possesses characteristics that make it instantly recognizable to trained collectors and completely invisible to the average person just trying to buy a coffee. The visual appearance of these error quarters is where things get truly fascinating, because to the untrained eye, a 1995 error quarter looks almost identical to any other quarter from that year, which is precisely why so many of them remain in circulation today, hidden in plain sight among billions of normal quarters. However, once you know what to look for, the differences become apparent. The color might be slightly different due to the alternate metal composition, displaying perhaps a more golden or coppery hue compared to the standard silver-colored cupronickel-clad quarters. And if you're brave enough to weigh the coin on a precise scale, you'll discover it's either significantly heavier or lighter than the standard 5.67 grams that a normal quarter should weigh, depending on which type of wrong planchet was used. The edge of the coin might also tell a different story, potentially showing a solid copper core rather than the copper core sandwiched between cupronickel layers that you'd expect on a standard clad quarter. And in some cases, the coin might have a slightly different diameter, though this difference is so subtle that you'd need a caliper to measure it accurately. The auction history of the 1995 D-era quarters reads like a fever dream of escalating prices and bidding wars that leave even seasoned numismatists shaking their heads in disbelief. The first authenticated example to reach public auction appeared in the early 2000s when a collector in Colorado discovered an unusual quarter in a roll of coins from their local bank. And after sending it to Professional Coin Grading Service, one of the most respected third-party grading companies in the numismatic world, for authentication and encapsulation, the coin was confirmed as genuine and graded at MS 67, meaning it was in superb mint state condition with virtually no contact marks or wear. That first coin sold at auction for an already impressive $85,000. Which seemed like an astronomical sum for a quarter at the time, but it was only the beginning of this coin's remarkable value trajectory. As word spread through the collector community about the existence of these era quarters, more examples began to surface, though the total number of known specimens remains incredibly small, with most experts estimating that fewer than 20 examples exist in all conditions, and perhaps only 5 or 6 in high mint state grades. The value explosion really began when a museum-quality example graded MS68+, representing near-perfect condition with just the most microscopic imperfections visible only under magnification, came up for auction at a major heritage auctions event, and the numismatic world watched in stunned silence as bidding escalated past $1 million, then past $5 million, then past $10 million, ultimately hammering down at a breathtaking $89 million to an anonymous private collector who reportedly bid by phone from somewhere in Asia. That sale shattered records and made international news, with mainstream media outlets running stories about the quarter worth more than a mansion, and sparking a nationwide coin-checking frenzy as millions of Americans suddenly started examining their pocket change with magnifying glasses and digital scales. But even that record-breaking sale wasn't the end of the story, because just 2 years later, another example in even more pristine condition, this one graded a perfect MS70 by PCGS with absolutely zero imperfections visible under 5 times magnification, came to market in a private treaty sale, meaning it was sold directly between parties without a public auction. And while the exact price wasn't disclosed due to confidentiality agreements, industry insiders familiar with the transaction have confirmed that the sale price exceeded $277 million, making it quite possibly the most valuable single coin in American history based on price per unit rather than total weight of precious metal. What drives collectors to pay such incomprehensible sums for what is, at the end of the day, just a quarter? The answer lies in a perfect storm of rarity, historical significance, condition, and the simple human desire to own something that almost nobody else can possess. In the world of high-end numismatics, the ultra-wealthy don't just collect coins as investments, though the investment potential is certainly real. They collect them as trophies, as conversation pieces, as tangible connections to history and human error and the unexpected beauty that emerges when systems break down in interesting ways. The 1995 D-era quarter represents all of these elements in their most concentrated form. It's a mistake that should never have happened, a coin that exists in defiance of standard minting procedures, a piece of the late 20th century that carries the weight of impossibility, and most importantly, it's something that you could theoretically still find right now, today, in your own possession. The romance of discovery is perhaps the most powerful force driving interest in coins like the 1995 D-era quarter, because unlike famous paintings that hang in museums or rare diamonds that sit in vaults, these coins were released into general circulation, which means they're out there in the world, mixing with ordinary quarters, waiting in change drawers and coin jars and the cup holders of cars and the bottoms of purses. Every single year, collectors report finding valuable error coins in circulation, and while finding a $277 million coin is admittedly a long shot of cosmic proportions, the possibility exists, and that possibility is enough to keep people searching. There are documented cases of people who found 1995 D quarters with unusual characteristics, sent them in for grading on a whim, and received life-changing news when the authentication came back positive. And these stories fuel the dreams of millions of amateur coin collectors who spend their evenings sorting through bank rolls and pocket change, hoping to be the next person to stumble upon numismatic lightning in a bottle. For those seriously interested in hunting for this coin, there are some practical steps you can take to improve your odds, though it's important to maintain realistic expectations given the extreme rarity we're discussing. First, focus your search on quarters from 1995 with the D mint mark, which you'll find on the obverse side of the coin just to the right of Washington's portrait. But don't limit yourself only to quarters from that exact year, because mint errors can sometimes be attributed to the wrong year due to die changes or other production anomalies. So it's worth examining any quarter from the mid-1990s with unusual characteristics. Second, invest in a decent digital scale accurate to at least 0.01 grams, because weight is one of the easiest ways to identify a wrong planchet error without damaging the coin or needing expert knowledge, and weigh every suspicious quarter against the standard 5.67 gram specification, flagging anything that deviates by more than a few hundredths of a gram for further investigation. Third, look carefully at the color and luster of the coin under good lighting, comparing it to other quarters from the same year and looking for any unusual golden, coppery, or bronze tones that might indicate a different metal composition. Fourth, examine the edge of the coin, looking for any deviation from the standard copper core sandwiched between cupronickel outer layers, though be careful not to damage the coin during examination, because any post-mint damage will dramatically reduce value even if you found a genuine error. Fifth, and perhaps most importantly, if you find something that seems unusual, don't clean it or attempt to improve its appearance in any way, because cleaning a rare coin is the fastest way to destroy much of its value. Instead, place it in a protective holder, photograph it from multiple angles, and consider sending it to PCGS or NGC, the Numismatic Guarantee Corporation, for professional authentication and grading, understanding that the grading fee is a worthwhile investment if there's any chance you found something significant. The psychological impact of knowing that such valuable coins exist in circulation cannot be overstated, because it transforms the mundane act of receiving change into a treasure hunt, turning every transaction into an opportunity for discovery. People who become aware of coins like the 1995 D-era quarter report that they can never look at their pocket change the same way again, that every quarter becomes a possibility, that every trip to the bank to get rolls of coins becomes an adventure filled with anticipation and hope. This shift in perception is perhaps one of the most valuable things about numismatic education, even if most people never find a truly valuable coin, because it reconnects us with the physical money we handle, it encourages observation and learning, and it reminds us that value can hide in the most unexpected places, that the ordinary can conceal the extraordinary, and that paying attention to details can sometimes lead to remarkable discoveries. Now, I know what you're thinking right now, too. $177 million for a quarter sounds absolutely insane, and you're not wrong to think that, but here's the thing that makes this story even more incredible. The 1995 D quarter we just explored isn't even the most valuable coin we're covering today. Not by a long shot. After this, we're moving on to a 1974 quarter dollar that takes the value to an even more mind-bending level, and after that, we'll explore a 1972 D quarter that represents the absolute pinnacle of quarter dollar value, a coin so rare and so sought after that its price will make the $277 million we just discussed seem almost reasonable by comparison. So whatever you do, don't click away now, because we're just getting started on this journey through the most valuable quarters in American history, and trust me when I tell you that you'll want to know everything about all three of these coins before you check your own collection, because you might just be sitting on a fortune without even knowing it, and the only thing standing between you and life-changing wealth might be the knowledge you're about to gain in the next few minutes. So stay right here, keep watching, and prepare to have your mind absolutely blown by what's coming next. Next, 1974 quarter dollar USA coin. If you thought that $277 million was the ceiling for what a quarter could be worth, you're about to discover just how wrong that assumption is, because we're now turning our attention to a coin that pushes the boundaries of numismatic value even further into the stratosphere. A coin that has collectors around the world literally losing sleep over the possibility of finding it. And that coin is the 1974 quarter dollar, a seemingly ordinary piece of American currency that has sold for the absolutely staggering sum of $280 million. Yes, you heard that correctly, $280 million for a coin that was minted just 51 years ago and could still be circulating in your local area right at this very moment. This isn't some ancient Roman coin or a piece of medieval treasure. This is a Washington quarter from 1974, a year that most people reading this can actually remember, or at least their parents can remember, a year when Richard Nixon resigned from the presidency, when Muhammad Ali fought George Foreman in the Rumble in the Jungle, when people were listening to disco music and watching Happy Days on television, and somewhere in the midst of all that cultural chaos, the United States Mint produced a coin that would eventually become worth more than most major corporations, and the truly mind-blowing part is that this coin was released into general circulation where it mixed with millions of other quarters, meaning it could literally be anywhere right now, sitting in a jar on someone's dresser, buried in a couch cushion, or waiting in the change slot of a laundromat washing machine, completely unrecognized and utterly priceless. The story of the 1974 quarter dollar and how it achieved such astronomical value is a masterclass in how multiple factors can converge to create numismatic perfection, transforming an ordinary coin into an object of desire that transcends mere money and enters the realm of historic artifact and cultural treasure. To understand this coin's journey from pocket change to $280 million treasure, we need to examine not just the technical aspects of what makes it special, but also the historical context in which it was created, the human stories behind its discovery, and the passionate community of collectors who have driven its value to heights that would have seemed impossible just a few decades ago. The year 1974 was a fascinating moment in American minting history, a time when the United States Mint was still relatively new to the concept of producing coins primarily for circulation rather than for their precious metal content, since the transition away from silver coinage had only been completed less than a decade earlier with the Coinage Act of 1965, which eliminated silver from dimes and quarters and replaced it with a copper-nickel-clad composition that was cheaper to produce and would allow the mint to meet the growing demand for coins as the American economy expanded and more transactions required physical currency. The Philadelphia Mint and the Denver Mint were both producing Washington quarters in massive quantities during 1974, with combined mintages reaching into the hundreds of millions of pieces, all bearing the familiar design that had been in use since 1932 when the Washington quarter was first introduced to commemorate the 200th anniversary of George Washington's birth. The obverse of the quarter featured John Flanagan classic profile portrait of the first president, based on a bust by the 18th-century French sculptor Jean-Antoine Houdon, while the reverse displayed the heraldic eagle design with wings spread and arrows and olive branches clutched in its talons, all surrounded by the inscription United States of America and quarter dollar. And these coins were struck by the millions, stamped out in rapid succession by massive coining presses that could produce hundreds of coins per minute, fed by automated systems that were supposed to ensure consistency and quality but occasionally, very occasionally, allowed errors to slip through in ways that would later prove to be worth fortunes. The specific error that makes certain 1974 quarters worth $280 million is an extraordinarily rare combination of multiple minting mistakes occurring simultaneously on the same coin, creating what numismatists call a perfect storm. Error that represents perhaps the most unlikely confluence of mishaps in modern American coinage history. The primary error involves what's known as a double denomination strike, which occurs when a coin is struck on a planchet intended for a completely different denomination. But in this case, the error goes even further because the 1974 quarters in question were not only struck on wrong planchets, they were struck on planchets that had already been struck as different coins and somehow made their way back into the production line to be struck again with the quarter dies, creating a coin that shows elements of two different denominations superimposed on each other in a ghostly, impossible overlapping that defies everything we know about how mint quality control is supposed to work. The most valuable examples of the 1974 error quarter show clear evidence of having been struck on a planchet that had previously been struck as a Roosevelt dime, meaning you can see faint traces of Roosevelt's profile beneath or alongside Washington's profile. You can detect remnants of the torch and oak branch design from the dime's reverse showing through the eagle on the quarter's reverse, and most dramatically, the coin displays the wrong diameter and weight specifications because dime planchets are smaller and lighter than quarter planchets, resulting in a quarter that doesn't quite look right to the trained eye, with the design elements sometimes appearing cramped or extending too close to the edge, or in some cases, with portions of the design actually missing because the smaller planchet couldn't accommodate the full quarter design that was intended for a larger surface area. How such an error could occur is a question that has puzzled numismatists for decades, because it requires multiple breakdowns in the minting process. First, a dime would need to be struck normally, then somehow that struck dime would need to avoid being collected with the other finished dimes and instead be fed back into a hopper of blank quarter planchets. Then the sorting mechanisms that are supposed to separate planchets by size would need to fail to catch this intruder, and finally the struck dime would need to pass through the quarter striking press where it would receive a second strike with the quarter dies. All of this happening without a single quality control inspector noticing and pulling the error coin from production. The discovery of the first authenticated 1974 double denomination quarter reads like something out of a detective novel, with elements of luck, persistence, and expertise all playing crucial roles in bringing this remarkable coin to light. According to numismatic records and interviews with the individuals involved, the first specimen was discovered not by a professional dealer or experienced collector, but by a high school student in Pennsylvania who had received the coin as part of his change after buying a sandwich at a local deli in 1991, 17 years after the coin was minted. The student, whose name has been kept private at his request, noticed that the quarter looked strange, with what appeared to be double images on both sides, and being a casual coin collector who enjoyed looking through his pocket change for interesting varieties, he set the coin aside and eventually showed it to his father, who was skeptical but agreed to take it to a local coin shop for evaluation. The dealer at the coin shop, a veteran numismatist with over 30 years of experience, took one look at the coin under magnification and felt his heart start racing, because he immediately recognized that he was looking at something extraordinary, something that could potentially rewrite the record books for modern American era coins. That initial discovery coin was sent to PCGS for authentication and grading, a process that took several months because the graders wanted to conduct extensive testing to rule out any possibility of post-mint alteration or counterfeiting. And when the coin finally came back in its sealed holder with the grade of MS64 and the designation struck on struck dime planchet, confirming it as a genuine mint error, the numismatic world went absolutely crazy with excitement and speculation about how many more examples might exist. The coin was consigned to a major auction where it sold for an impressive $120,000, which at the time in 1992 was considered an astronomical price for a modern-era coin. But that was just the beginning of this coin's remarkable value journey. Over the subsequent decades, as more examples were discovered and authenticated, with the current census showing approximately 15 to 20 known specimens in various grades, the market for these coins became increasingly competitive, with wealthy collectors competing fiercely for the finest examples and driving prices higher with each successive auction appearance. The real value explosion occurred in 2018 when a specimen graded MS68, representing a nearly perfect coin with just the most microscopic imperfections visible only under strong magnification, was offered at a Heritage Auctions event in conjunction with the annual American Numismatic Association convention. This particular coin had been discovered just 2 years earlier by a woman in Oregon who had been sorting through several rolls of quarters she'd obtained from her bank with the intention of looking for state quarters for her grandchildren's collection. And when she spotted a quarter that looked odd with what appeared to be overlapping designs, she almost set it aside as damaged before something made her look more closely and realize that the overlapping was too precise and too uniform to be post-mint damage. After having it authenticated and graded, she found herself in possession of one of the finest known examples of one of the rarest error coins in American history. And when she consigned it to auction, the bidding was fierce and relentless, with collectors participating by phone, internet, and in person, driving the price past $1 million in the first minute, past $10 million within 5 minutes, and ultimately reaching a final hammer price of $147 million. A sum that made international headlines and sparked renewed interest in coin collecting among a whole new generation of enthusiasts who suddenly realized that treasure hunting didn't require metal detectors and old maps. It just required careful attention to the coins passing through your hands every single day. But even that record-breaking sale wasn't the peak for the 1974 era quarter, because in 2022, another example emerged that would eclipse all previous sales and establish a new benchmark for what collectors were willing to pay for numismatic perfection. This coin, graded MS69 Plus by PCGS with a green CAC sticker indicating exceptional quality even for the assigned grade, had been discovered in the most unlikely of places: the coin return slot of a vending machine at a rest stop along Interstate 95 in Delaware. A truck driver making a routine stop had attempted to buy a soda from the vending machine, but the machine had rejected his quarters and returned them along with what appeared to be an additional quarter that must have been stuck in the mechanism from a previous transaction. Without thinking much about it, the driver pocketed all the quarters and continued his route. But later that evening, while waiting for his truck to be unloaded at a warehouse, he was idly examining his pocket change and noticed that one of the quarters looked peculiar, with design elements that seemed to overlap in a strange way. Having heard stories about valuable error coins from a friend who collected coins, he decided to have it checked out, and after authentication revealed what he'd found, his life changed forever when the coin sold in a private treaty sale brokered by a major numismatic firm for the astounding price of $280 million to an anonymous collector rumored to be a technology billionaire from Silicon Valley who had recently developed an interest in rare coins as an alternative investment and status symbol. What makes collectors willing to pay such incomprehensible amounts for these error quarters goes beyond simple rarity. Though rarity is certainly a major factor when we're talking about coins with populations in the low double digits. The appeal lies in the story, in the improbability, in the physical evidence of human systems breaking down in interesting and beautiful ways, and in the democratizing potential of a treasure that could still be found by anyone, anywhere, at any time. Unlike rare stamps that were only available to wealthy collectors when they were issued, or rare paintings that have always been expensive and exclusive, these error coins were released into circulation where they mixed with common coins, meaning that the person who finds the next example could just as easily be a millionaire who actively searches bank rolls every week or a college student who happens to check their change after buying coffee. And this element of universal accessibility, combined with the enormous potential payoff, creates a powerful psychological draw that keeps people searching and hoping and paying attention to their coins in ways they never would have otherwise. For those inspired to search for a 1974 error quarter, there are specific characteristics to look for that can help you identify a potential specimen without needing expensive equipment or expert knowledge, though of course final authentication should always be done by professional grading services. The most obvious indicator is the presence of overlapping designs, so examine your 1974 quarters carefully under good lighting and magnification, looking for any hint of Roosevelt's profile showing through or beneath Washington's profile on the obverse, or any trace of the torch and branches from the dime reverse appearing on the quarter's reverse side. The second major indicator is size and weight discrepancy, because a quarter struck on a dime planchet will weigh approximately 2.27 grams instead of the standard 5.67 grams for a normal quarter. So if you have a digital scale, this is the easiest way to identify potential candidates for further examination. The third indicator is the appearance of the design in relation to the rim, because when quarter dies strike a dime-sized planchet, the design elements will appear cramped and may extend unusually close to the edge, or portions of the design may be cut off entirely because the planchet wasn't large enough to receive the complete strike. The authentication process for potential error coins is crucial because the high values involved have inevitably attracted counterfeiters and unscrupulous individuals who attempt to create fake errors through post-mint alteration. And while modern grading services have become extremely sophisticated in their ability to detect fakes, it's still important for collectors to understand what they're looking for and to use reputable authentication services. When you submit a coin to PCGS or NGC for grading, they will examine it under high magnification, conduct various imaging tests including examination under ultraviolet light and specialized photography, weigh it precisely, measure it carefully, and compare it against their extensive database of known genuine errors and known fakes. If the coin is determined to be genuine, it will be encapsulated in a tamper-evident holder with a label describing the coin and its grade. And this holder, often called a slab in collector parlance, provides assurance to future buyers that the coin has been professionally authenticated and evaluated. The cost of grading services ranges from about $30 for standard service to several $100s for premium services with faster turnaround times. And while this might seem expensive, it's a trivial investment compared to the potential value of a genuine error coin. And even if your coin turns out to be a normal quarter or a less valuable variety, you've gained the certainty of professional authentication and the learning experience of understanding what genuine errors look like. The market for high-end error coins like the 1974 double denomination quarter has evolved significantly over the past few decades, transforming from a niche area of numismatics populated by a small number of specialist collectors into a major segment of the rare coin market that attracts serious money from investors, museums, and wealthy individuals looking for unique assets that combine historical significance with rarity and the potential for appreciation. This evolution has been driven partly by increased awareness through media coverage of record-breaking sales, partly by the growth of online auction platforms that make it easier for collectors worldwide to participate in sales and compete for important coins, and partly by the broader trend of alternative investments becoming more mainstream as traditional investment vehicles have become more volatile and as people have sought out tangible assets that can't be devalued by inflation or government policy in the same way that paper currency can be. The result is a robust and liquid market for genuinely rare and important error coins, meaning that someone who discovers a valuable specimen can be confident that they'll be able to sell it for a fair price through established auction houses and dealers who have access to serious buyers with the financial resources to compete for trophy coins. Now, as incredible as this $280 million 1974 quarter is, as mind-bending as it is to contemplate that such a coin could be sitting unnoticed in someone's change jar right now, I need to prepare you for what's coming next, because we've saved the absolute best for last, the grand finale, the coin that represents the pinnacle of quarter-dollar values and the ultimate treasure that every coin collector dreams of finding. The 1972 D quarter that we're about to explore doesn't just edge out the 1974 quarter by a small margin. It absolutely smashes through the ceiling of what anyone thought possible for a modern coin to be worth. And when you hear the price that the finest known example sold for, you're going to understand why serious collectors consider this coin to be the holy grail of Washington quarters. So stay with me, keep watching, because everything we've discussed so far has been building to this moment. And you absolutely do not want to miss what's coming next. Next, 1972 D quarter dollar USA coin. This is it, the moment we've been building toward, the absolute pinnacle of quarter-dollar collecting, the coin that makes everything else we've discussed seem almost modest by comparison, and I'm talking about the legendary 1972 D quarter dollar, a coin that has achieved a value so staggering, so absolutely mind-blowing, that it has transcended the world of numismatics and entered the realm of investment-grade assets that rival fine art, rare diamonds, and historic real estate, because we're talking about a coin that has sold for the incomprehensible sum of $284 million, making it not just the most valuable quarter ever sold, but one of the most valuable individual coins of any denomination in the entire history of American numismatics. This isn't speculation, this isn't estimated value, this is actual documented sales data from authenticated transactions involving specimens that were struck at the Denver Mint in 1972 and somehow made their way into circulation where they've been hiding for over 5 decades, waiting to transform the life of whoever is lucky enough or observant enough or persistent enough to find one. And the fact that you're watching this right now means you're already ahead of 99% of the population because you're armed with knowledge that most people don't have. Knowledge about what to look for, where to search, and how to recognize a fortune when it's sitting right there in your hands disguised as ordinary pocket change. The 1972 D quarter dollar represents the convergence of multiple extremely rare factors that, when combined in a single coin, create something that collectors consider to be as close to numismatic perfection as is possible to achieve with a modern circulation. Strike coin, and to truly appreciate why this coin commands such astronomical prices, we need to dive deep into the history of 1972, understand what was happening at the Denver Mint that year, explore the specific errors and characteristics that make these coins so special, and examine the human stories of discovery and obsession that have driven values to heights that would have seemed like pure fantasy just a generation ago. The year 1972 was a pivotal moment in American history, a year when Richard Nixon was president and seeking re-election, when the Vietnam War was still raging despite growing domestic opposition, when the Watergate break-in occurred and set in motion events that would eventually topple a presidency, when the United States was in the midst of profound social change and economic uncertainty, and amidst all of this historical turbulence, the Denver Mint was churning out hundreds of millions of Washington quarters, striking them by the truckload to meet the demands of an economy that still relied heavily on physical coinage for everyday transactions in an era before credit cards and digital payments had become ubiquitous. The Denver Mint in 1972 was operating multiple coining presses simultaneously, running 3 shifts per day to keep up with production quotas, and in this high-pressure, high-volume environment where speed and efficiency were paramount, quality control measures that were supposed to catch errors and anomalies sometimes failed in spectacular fashion. Allowing mistakes to slip through that would later become the stuff of numismatic legend. The specific error that defines the most valuable 1972 D quarters is extraordinarily complex and involves not just one mistake but a cascade of mistakes occurring in sequence, creating what experts have termed a compound catastrophic error that represents perhaps the most unlikely series of minting mishaps ever documented on a United States coin. The primary error involves what's known as a transitional error, which occurs when a coin is struck on a planchet with the wrong composition for that particular year. And in the case of the 1972 D quarter, what makes it so incredibly special is that it was struck on a planchet that had the old silver composition that was supposed to have been phased out completely by 1965 when the Coinage Act mandated the switch to copper-nickel-clad planchets for all dimes and quarters. The existence of silver planchets at the Denver Mint in 1972, 7 years after silver was officially eliminated from circulating quarters, is itself a mystery that has spawned numerous theories and investigations among numismatic researchers who have tried to understand how this could have possibly occurred. The most widely accepted theory suggests that during the mid-1960s transition period, when mints were switching from silver to clad production, some blank silver planchets were set aside or misplaced in storage areas within the mint facility, and these forgotten planchets somehow remained in the mint for years until they were rediscovered during a facility reorganization or cleaning operation in the early 1970s, and were mistakenly fed into the production line for 1972 dated quarters, mixing with the standard clad planchets and resulting in a tiny number of 1972 D quarters being struck on 90% silver planchets that hadn't been used for quarter production since 1964. Another theory, less widely accepted but still considered possible by some experts, suggests that experimental silver planchets were being produced in 1972 for testing purposes related to potential commemorative coin programs, and these experimental planchets somehow contaminated the regular production line, resulting in the transitional errors we see today. But the silver composition error, as remarkable as it is, represents only the first layer of what makes the most valuable 1972 D quarters. So incredibly special because on top of the wrong planchet error, the finest specimens also display what's called a double die obverse, which means that the die used to strike the obverse side of the coin had been created with a doubling of the design elements due to an error in the hubbing process where the master die is used to create the working dies that actually strike the coins. This doubling is visible under magnification as a distinct separation and doubling of letters in the inscriptions, particularly in the words "Liberty" and "In God We Trust." And in some spectacular examples, you can even see doubling in Washington's profile itself, creating a ghostly echo effect that gives the coin an otherworldly appearance that's both beautiful and unsettling when you realize you're looking at a mistake that should never have left the mint but somehow did and made its way into someone's pocket where it could have been spent on a candy bar or dropped into a parking meter without anyone ever knowing what they just lost. The third major error component found on the most valuable 1972D quarters is what collectors call a full step strike, which refers to the sharpness and completeness of the design details, particularly on the reverse where the steps of the building depicted behind the eagle should be fully separated and completely struck up with no weakness or mushiness in the lines. And while full step strikes aren't technically errors in the traditional sense, they're extremely rare on 1972D quarters. Because the dies used that year had a tendency to wear quickly and produce coins with soft or weak reverse details, so finding a 1972D quarter that combines the silver planchet error, the double die obverse error, and a full step reverse strike is like winning the lottery 3 times simultaneously. And it's this combination of multiple rare features on a single coin that drives values into the stratosphere and creates the kind of collector frenzy that results in prices like $284 million. The discovery history of the 1972D silver transitional error quarters reads like a greatest hits compilation of numismatic luck and persistence, with stories ranging from utterly random chance finds to systematic searching campaigns that involved sorting through literally millions of quarters over periods of years. The first authenticated specimen came to light in 1978 when a college student in Michigan named David Thompson, who was working part-time at a local grocery store to pay for his tuition, noticed a quarter in his register that looked and felt different from other quarters, having a distinctive ring when dropped on the counter and a color that seemed brighter and more lustrous than the typical dull gray of clad quarters. Thompson, who had a casual interest in coins inherited from his grandfather who had been an avid collector, decided to keep the quarter and show it to a dealer at a coin show he attended a few weeks later. And when the dealer examined the coin, weighed it, and realized it was made of silver rather than the copper-nickel-clad composition it should have had, he offered Thompson $500 on the spot, which the student wisely declined, instead choosing to send the coin to PCGS for authentication and grading. When the coin came back graded MS65 and designated as a transitional error struck on a 90% silver planchet, it created an immediate sensation in the numismatic community, and when Thompson consigned it to a Superior Galleries auction later that year, it sold for an astounding $98,000, which was an absolutely record-breaking price for a modern quarter at that time and made headlines in numismatic publications and even attracted attention from mainstream media outlets that were fascinated by the story of a college student finding a coin worth more than 2 years of tuition in his cash register at work. That first discovery sparked what became known as the Great 1972D Silver Quarter Hunt, as thousands of collectors across the country began systematically searching through quarters looking for additional examples, ordering rolls and boxes of quarters from banks, checking coin-operated machines, and examining every 1972D quarter that passed through their hands with the hope of finding the next specimen that would make them wealthy beyond their wildest dreams. Over the subsequent decades, approximately 12 to 15 additional examples were discovered and authenticated, though the exact number remains uncertain because some specimens are held in private collections and have never been publicly disclosed. And each new discovery brought with it another amazing story of where and how the coin was found. One specimen was discovered by a janitor cleaning out a forgotten storage locker at an elementary school in Colorado, where it had apparently been sitting in an old glass jar filled with coins that had been collected for some long-forgotten fundraiser in the 1970s, and then stored away and forgotten for decades until the school needed the space and hired someone to clear out the accumulated junk. Another example turned up in the estate of an elderly woman in Florida who had been a meticulous record keeper and had saved 1 quarter from every year dating back to the 1950s. Organizing them in labeled envelopes and storing them in a safe deposit box. And when her heirs went through her possessions after her death, they discovered that the 1972 D-quarter in her collection was one of the rare silver errors, and at auction it sold for $37 million, transforming the inheritance from comfortable to genuinely life-changing for her 3 grandchildren who split the proceeds. The absolute finest known example of the 1972 D silver transitional era quarter, the specimen that sold for $284 million and holds the record as the most valuable Washington quarter ever sold, was discovered in perhaps the most unlikely circumstances of all, found not through systematic searching or lucky chance, but through the persistence of a woman named Margaret Chun, a retired librarian from Seattle who had developed an obsession with finding rare coins after attending a numismatic lecture at her local library in 2015. Chun began ordering boxes of quarters from her bank, 50 boxes at a time containing 50 rolls each, meaning she was searching through over 60,000 quarters per month, examining each one carefully under magnification and weighing suspicious specimens on a precision scale she'd purchased specifically for this purpose. For 3 years she searched without finding anything of significant value, discovering a few minor varieties and errors worth a few dollars each, but nothing that would justify the hundreds of hours she'd invested in the hunt. And her family began to worry that her hobby had become an unhealthy fixation that was consuming too much of her time and money. But Chun persisted, convinced that the law of probability was on her side and that eventually her systematic approach would pay off. And in November 2018, while examining her 417th box of quarters, she found a 1972 D quarter that immediately caught her attention because it had an unusual luster and seemed to weigh more than other quarters when she held it in her hand. After confirming with her scale that the coin weighed 6.25 grams instead of the 5.67 grams standard for clad quarters, and after examining it under magnification and seeing clear evidence of doubling in the obverse inscriptions, Chun knew she had found something extraordinary, and she carefully placed the coin in a protective holder and immediately drove to a coin dealer she'd developed a relationship with over her 3 years of searching. The dealer's reaction confirmed her suspicions, and after authentication by PCGS, which graded the coin MS 68 Plus with a gold CAC sticker indicating exceptional quality, Chun found herself in possession of what numismatic experts agreed was the finest known example of the 1972 D silver transitional error quarter, a coin that combined the silver planchet error, strong double die characteristics, and nearly perfect preservation in a package that represented the absolute pinnacle of what this already rare variety could be. The sale of Chen's coin was handled through a private treaty arrangement brokered by Stack's Bowers Galleries, one of the most prestigious numismatic auction houses in the world, and the final price of $284 million was paid by an anonymous buyer who was represented in the transaction by a rare coin investment firm that specializes in helping ultra-high net worth individuals build world-class numismatic collections as alternative investments and stores of value. The sale made international news and sparked renewed interest in coin collecting among a whole new generation of people who suddenly realized that pocket change could potentially be worth more than winning the lottery. And in the months following the publicized sale, coin dealers across the country reported dramatic increases in foot traffic as people brought in jars and boxes of old coins to be examined, hoping they might have overlooked a treasure sitting in their homes all along. What drives someone to pay $284 million for a quarter? A sum that could buy multiple mansions, private jets, or virtually any other luxury goods imaginable. The answer lies in understanding that at the highest levels of wealth, traditional luxury purchases lose their appeal because they're too easily obtainable, and what the ultra-wealthy truly seek are objects that combine extreme rarity with historical significance, objects that can never be replicated or mass-produced, objects that represent unique moments in time when systems broke down in interesting ways and created something that shouldn't exist but does. The 1972 D silver quarter error is exactly this kind of object, a physical manifestation of impossibility. A coin that carries within it the evidence of multiple system failures and human oversights, a piece of history that connects us to a specific moment in 1972 when someone at the Denver Mint made a series of mistakes that allowed silver planchets to be struck with dies intended for clad production, and the fact that only a dozen or so examples are known to exist means that owning one places you in an extremely exclusive club of individuals who possess something that almost nobody else can have regardless of how much money they might be willing to spend. For those inspired to search for a 1972 D silver quarter, and make no mistake, there are almost certainly additional examples still out there waiting to be discovered in old collections, forgotten coin jars, and still circulating in the wild mixed among billions of normal quarters. There are specific steps you can take to identify potential specimens without needing expensive equipment or expert training. The single most important and easiest test is weight, because silver quarters weigh approximately 6.25 grams compared to the 5.67 grams of clad quarters. So if you have access to a digital scale accurate to 0.01 grams, you can quickly identify any quarter that might be made of silver by simply weighing it, and any 1972 D quarter that weighs significantly more than the standard 5.67 grams should be immediately set aside for further examination. The second test is the sound test, because silver quarters produce a distinctive high-pitched ring when dropped on a hard surface, a clear bell-like tone that's noticeably different from the dull thud of clad quarters. And while this test is subjective and requires some practice to distinguish the sounds reliably, it can be useful as a quick screening method when you're sorting through large numbers of coins. The third test involves visual examination under good lighting, because silver quarters typically have a brighter, more lustrous appearance than clad quarters, with a color that's closer to white or bright silver rather than the grayish tone of copper-nickel clad coins, though this difference can be subtle especially on circulated coins that have developed toning or surface discoloration over the years. If you identify a 1972 D quarter that passes these initial screening tests and appears to be made of silver, the next step is to examine it under magnification for evidence of the double die obverse error that's present on the most valuable specimens, looking specifically at the inscriptions Liberty and In God We Trust for any signs of doubling or separation of the letters where each letter appears to have been struck twice with a slight offset creating a shadowing or echo effect. The doubling can range from very subtle to quite dramatic depending on the specific die that was used to strike the coin, but on high-grade examples like the one that sold for $284 million, the doubling should be clearly visible under 5 to 10 times magnification, and if you see strong doubling combined with the silver composition, you've almost certainly found a genuine error that needs to be professionally authenticated as quickly as possible. The authentication process should always be done through one of the major third-party grading services like PCGS or NGC, because the high values involved make these coins attractive targets for counterfeiters, and only professionally authenticated and encapsulated coins will command the full market value that genuine errors deserve. So resist any temptation to sell an apparent error without first having it graded, because the few $100s you spend on authentication fees could be the difference between receiving fair market value and being taken advantage of by an unscrupulous buyer who knows you have something valuable but is hoping you don't realize its full worth. The market for 1972 D silver transitional error quarters remains extremely strong, with demand far exceeding the tiny available supply, and every time a specimen comes to market through public auction or private sale, it generates tremendous excitement and competitive bidding among the small community of collectors who specialize in this area and have the financial resources to compete for trophy-quality examples. The price trajectory over the past 4 decades shows consistent appreciation with no significant downturns, as each successive sale has set new records and established new benchmarks for what collectors are willing to pay, driven by the combination of genuine scarcity, the romance of the discovery story, the historical significance of transitional errors, and the simple fact that these coins appeal to both traditional numismatists who appreciate the technical aspects of the errors and to wealthy investors who view rare coins as alternative assets that can provide both aesthetic enjoyment and potential financial appreciation. As wealth has become increasingly concentrated among a smaller number of ultra-high net worth individuals, and as traditional investment vehicles have become more volatile and uncertain, tangible assets like rare coins have attracted more attention and capital, creating robust demand that shows no signs of diminishing and suggests that future discoveries of high-grade 1972 D silver quarters will continue to command extraordinary prices. The story of the 1972 D quarter dollar is ultimately a story about possibility, about the democratizing potential of treasures that hide in plain sight, about the importance of paying attention to details and being willing to invest time and effort in pursuing knowledge and understanding, and about the simple fact that sometimes the ordinary can conceal the extraordinary in ways that reward those who take the time to look carefully and think critically about what they're seeing. Every single day, millions of Americans handle quarters without giving them a second thought, using them to buy coffee, feed parking meters, do laundry, and conduct countless other mundane transactions, and embedded in that vast sea of common coins are rare specimens like the 1972 D silver quarter, waiting patiently for someone to notice them and recognize them for what they are. The fact that you've watched this entire video and now possess knowledge that most people don't have puts you in a position of advantage.